The fluorescent bulbs in Mr. Peterson's office flickered like they were trying to send me a message in Morse code, but I was too numb to decode it. 19 years, 2 months, and 16 days. That's how long St. Catherine's Home for Children had been the only address I could claim as mine. Now, sitting across from the director with a cardboard box on my lap containing everything the state deemed important enough to save, I realized I was about to become a statistic. Another aged-out foster kid with nowhere to go and no one waiting. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat for the 3rd time, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years whenever he had to deliver news he knew would hurt. He was a decent man, really, just trapped in a system that chewed up good intentions and spit out policy manuals. "Claire," he started, then paused to adjust his wire-rimmed glasses. "You understand that at 19, our responsibility officially ends today. We've arranged temporary housing through the Transitional Living Program, and there's a caseworker who'll help you apply for jobs and benefits." His words felt rehearsed, smooth from repetition. How many kids had sat in this same chair, heard this same speech? I nodded because that's what you do when adults are trying to help but can't actually fix anything. The transitional program meant a shared apartment in a rough part of Portland with 3 other girls I'd never met, all of us scrambling for minimum wage jobs and pretending we knew how to be adults. The caseworker would mean appointments I'd have to remember, forms I'd have to fill out, and eventually, when the funding ran out or I missed too many check-ins, I'd be on my own anyway. It was a bridge to nowhere, but it was the only bridge offered. "Mr. Peterson slid the box across his desk, and I pulled it into my lap. Inside were the usual documents: birth certificate, immunization records, my high school diploma from last year, and a thin file with Claire Hendricks typed on the tab. I'd looked through this file before during one of those mandatory life skills classes where they taught us how to build credit and budget money we didn't have. There was never much in it. I'd been left at the hospital when I was 4 days old. No note, no name, just a baby girl with a hospital bracelet that said "Baby Girl Doe," until some nurse decided Claire was a nice enough name, and it stuck. Social services had searched for family, but the trail was cold from the start. My mother was a ghost, my father a question mark, and I'd spent my whole life being nobody's daughter. But this time, when I opened the file, there was something new. An envelope, cream-colored and thick, wedged between my 5th grade report card and a dental record. My name was written across the front in elegant cursive, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who'd learned to write before computers existed. "What's this?" I asked, holding it up. Mr. Peterson's face shifted into something that might have been sympathy, or might have been relief that he had something, anything, to offer beyond the standard goodbye package. "That came to us about 6 months ago," he explained. "It was sent by a law firm in Montana with instructions to give it to you only when you left our care. We verified it was legitimate, ran it through our protocols. It's addressed to you, so it's yours to open." My hands shook as I turned the envelope over. The return address was printed in small letters: Whitman and Associates, Legal Services, Cascade Falls, Montana. I'd never been to Montana. Didn't know anyone who lived there. The seal on the back was already broken, probably from Mr. Peterson's verification process, but I hesitated anyway. Sometimes not knowing felt safer than finding out. "Do you know what's in it?" I asked. He shook his head. "We weren't permitted to read the contents. Attorney-client privilege, even though you weren't technically the client. The letter that came with it only said it concerned your family history and should be delivered when you reached adulthood." Family history. Those 2 words hit me like a fist to the chest. I'd never had a family history. I was the girl with no yesterday, no context, no stories about where I came from or who I looked like or what traits I'd inherited. And now, on the day I was being released into the world with nothing but a cardboard box and a prayer, someone wanted to tell me I had a history after all. I pulled out the contents carefully. There was a letter, folded into precise thirds, and a small photograph, the edges worn soft from age. The photo showed a woman, maybe in her 60s, standing in front of a weathered barn. She had steel-grey hair pulled back in a practical bun, sun-weathered skin that spoke of decades outdoors, and eyes that crinkled at the corners like she smiled often. She wore jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt, and her hand rested on a fence post with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Something about her face felt familiar in a way I couldn't name, like looking at a reflection through cloudy water. I unfolded the letter, and the paper rustled in the quiet office. The handwriting matched the envelope, careful and steady. "My dearest Claire," it began, and I had to stop reading to catch my breath. Nobody had ever called me dearest anything. If you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've finally left the children's home. I'm sorry I wasn't there to meet you, to hold you, to tell you in person all the things I'm about to tell you in ink. My name is Margaret Hendricks, and I'm your grandmother. Your mother was my daughter, Lily, and she loved you more than her own life, though she never got the chance to show you. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had a grandmother. Her name was Margaret. My mother's name was Lily. These simple facts felt like someone had just handed me a map after 19 years of wandering in the dark. I kept reading, my throat tight. Lily was 21 when she had you, and she was scared. Not of you, never of you, but of everything else. She struggled with addiction, Claire, the kind that grabs hold of young people and doesn't let go easily. She tried to get clean, tried to build a life for you both, but the drugs were stronger than her will. When you were 4 days old, she brought you to that hospital and asked them to find you a good home. Then she disappeared. I looked for her for 3 years before the police found her body in a motel outside of Seattle. Overdose. She was 24. I had to stop reading. Mr. Peterson quietly pushed a box of tissues across his desk, and I took 3, pressing them against my eyes. My mother had a name. She'd loved me. She died trying to escape something that had its claws in her. It wasn't the fairy tale reunion I'd sometimes imagined as a little girl, but it was real. It was true, and somehow that mattered more than any fantasy. "There's more," Mr. Peterson said gently. "Take your time." I nodded and forced myself to continue. "I didn't know about you until 2 years after Lily died," Margaret's letter continued. "A social worker tracked me down, said my daughter had given birth and the baby had been placed in care. By then you were 6 years old. I tried to get custody of you, Claire. I swear I tried. But I was 68, living alone on a failing cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere, Montana, and the state decided I wasn't fit, too old, too isolated, too financially unstable. They said you deserved better than an aging woman on a dying ranch." The letter trembled in my hands. She'd tried. She'd actually tried to take me. "So I did the only thing I could do," the letter went on. "I made sure you'd have something when you grew up. I couldn't give you a childhood, but I could give you a choice. The ranch is yours, Claire. All 270 acres of it, the house, the barn, everything. It's not much. The cattle are long gone and the buildings need work, but it's land. It's a place. It's yours if you want it. The lawyer has all the paperwork. His name is Thomas Whitman, and his number is at the bottom of this letter. Call him, go see the ranch, and know that even though I couldn't raise you, I thought about you every single day. You come from strong women who loved fiercely and fought hard. That's in your blood, don't ever forget it." The letter was signed, "Your grandmother Margaret Hendricks," and below that was a date from 8 months ago. She'd written this knowing she was dying, knowing I'd read it after she was gone. I looked at the photograph again, studying Margaret's face, and this time I saw it. The shape of my nose, the set of my jaw, the way her eyes tilted up slightly at the outer corners. I'd spent my whole life looking in mirrors and seeing no connection to anyone, and now I was staring at a woman who shared my features, my blood, my history. Mr. Peterson gave me a moment before speaking. "What will you do?" I looked at him, then at the letter, then at the photograph. I thought about the transitional apartment, the caseworker, the slow, grinding path toward nowhere in particular. "I'm going to Montana," I said, and saying it out loud made it real. Mr. Peterson nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer but wanted to make sure I understood what I was choosing. "It's a big decision, Claire. You'd be leaving everything familiar, moving somewhere you've never been, to a property you've never seen. There's no guarantee it'll be habitable or that you'll be able to make it work." He wasn't trying to discourage me, just doing his job, making sure I thought things through. But I'd spent 19 years in a place where nothing was mine, where every decision was made by someone else, where familiar just meant safe enough to survive. I didn't want familiar anymore. I wanted mine. "I understand," I told him. But what do I have here? A shared apartment and a part-time job stocking shelves somewhere. At least in Montana I'd have land. I'd have something that belonged to my family. To me. He couldn't argue with that. He pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. "This is my personal cell phone. If things don't work out, if you need help, call me." I mean that. I took the card and tucked it into my pocket, genuinely touched. In a system that treated kids like case files, Mr. Peterson had always tried to see us as actual people. That counted for something. I left his office carrying my cardboard box and a photograph of a grandmother I'd never meet, walking through the hallways of St. Catherine's for the last time. A few kids I'd known were gathered in the common room, watching some cartoon with the volume too loud. I waved, but they barely noticed. That's how it worked here. People left all the time, and getting attached only made it hurt more when they disappeared. Outside, Portland's grey October sky pressed down like a damp blanket, the kind of weather that made everything feel heavier than it should. I walked 6 blocks to the public library, the same branch where I'd spent countless hours reading books about places I'd never go and people who had families that wanted them. The librarian at the front desk, Mrs. Kim, looked up from her computer and smiled when she saw me. "Claire, I heard today was your last day. How are you feeling?" Mrs. Kim had always been kind to me, recommending books, letting me stay past closing time when she knew I had nowhere better to be. "I'm okay," I said. "Actually, I need to use a computer. I have to look something up." She gestured toward the public terminals. "Take your time, honey. And Claire, whatever comes next, I hope it's good for you." I settled into a chair at the computer farthest from the door and pulled up a browser. First, I typed in the phone number from Margaret's letter. Thomas Whitman's law office website appeared, professional and straightforward. The firm handled estate planning, property law, and agricultural legal matters in Cascade Falls, Montana, a town I'd never heard of. I clicked on the About page and found Thomas Whitman's photograph, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a weathered face that suggested he spent time outdoors. His biography said he'd been practicing law in Cascade Falls for 26 years and specialized in ranch estate transfers. That felt like a good sign, like this was someone who understood what Margaret's ranch meant, not just as property, but as legacy. Next, I searched for Cascade Falls itself. It was small, population barely scraping 3,000, nestled in the northwestern corner of Montana, where the mountains met the high plains. The images that came up showed wide-open spaces, big skies, and the kind of landscape that made you feel small in a way that was freeing rather than frightening. Main Street looked like something from an old Western movie. Brick buildings with false fronts. Pickup trucks parked diagonally, American flags snapping in the wind. It was as different from Portland as possible, and that appealed to me more than I wanted to admit. I found a local news site and read through recent articles. Town council meetings about road repairs, high school football scores, a feature on a woman celebrating her 100th birthday, normal small-town stuff. Then I found an article from 9 months ago with the headline, "Local rancher Margaret Hendricks passes at 81. My throat tightened as I clicked on it. The obituary was brief but warm. Margaret Hendricks, beloved longtime resident and proprietor of Hendricks Ranch, died peacefully at home, surrounded by friends. Margaret was known for her fierce independence, her skill with horses, and her generosity to neighbors in need. She is survived by a granddaughter, Claire, and will be deeply missed by the Cascade Falls community. Services will be private. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Montana Cattlemen's Foundation. Beloved, generous, missed. I read those words over and over. My grandmother had been someone people cared about, someone who mattered in her community. And she'd made sure I knew I was her granddaughter, that I was family even in death. I pulled up a map and calculated the distance from Portland to Cascade Falls, just over 700 miles, most of it through eastern Washington and northern Idaho, before crossing into Montana. It would take at least 12 hours of driving, assuming I had a car, which I didn't. I checked bus routes and found one option, a Greyhound that would take me through Spokane and Missoula with multiple transfers. Total travel time nearly 18 hours. The ticket cost $83 one way. I had $96 to my name, money I'd saved from working in the St. Catherine's kitchen for $2 an hour, a job training program that was really just free labor with a fancy name. $83 would leave me with $13 for food and emergencies. It was cutting it close, impossibly close, but what choice did I have? I couldn't afford to stay in Portland any more than I could afford the bus ticket. I called Thomas Whitman's office from Mrs. Kim's desk phone, my hands shaking slightly. A receptionist answered, cheerful and professional. "Whitman and Associates, how may I help you?" I cleared my throat. "Hi, my name is Claire Hendricks. I'm calling about Margaret Hendricks's estate. I received a letter saying I should contact Mr. Whitman." There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. "Claire, yes, Mr. Whitman has been expecting your call. Hold on just a moment." The line clicked to soft country music, and I waited, my heart hammering. Then a male voice came on, warm and reassuring. "Claire, this is Thomas Whitman. I'm very glad you called. First, let me say how sorry I am about your grandmother. Margaret was a remarkable woman, and she spoke of you often, even though she'd never met you. That hit me harder than I expected. She'd spoken of me. To people who knew her, I'd existed, at least in conversation. "Thank you," I managed. "I just got her letter today. I'm trying to understand everything." Thomas's voice softened. "Of course, it's a lot to take in. Here's what you need to know. Margaret set up her estate very carefully. The ranch, all 270 acres, the house, the barn, all equipment and structures, they're yours. She put everything in a trust that transferred to you upon your 19th birthday or upon leaving foster care, whichever came first. There's also a small account, about $4,000, set aside for immediate expenses, property taxes, repairs, whatever you need to get started. $4,000. I couldn't process that number. It was more money than I'd ever had, more than I'd ever imagined having. "The property is clear, no mortgage, no liens," Thomas continued. "But I need to be honest with you, Claire. The ranch hasn't been worked in about 4 years since Margaret's health declined. The house needs maintenance, the fences are in rough shape, and there's no livestock. It's not a turnkey operation. But it's solid land, good bones, and it's yours if you want it. The question is, do you want it?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I want it. I'm coming to Montana." I could hear the smile in his voice. "Good. When can you get here?" I looked at Mrs. Kim, who was pretending not to listen but definitely listening. "I can catch a bus tomorrow if I can afford the ticket. I have $96. There was a pause. "Tell you what," Thomas said. "You get yourself to Spokane, and I'll wire you money for the rest of the trip. Consider it an advance on the estate account. Margaret would have wanted you to get here safely, not scraping by on nothing." Relief washed over me so intensely I had to sit down. "Thank you, really thank you." We worked out the details, where I'd pick up the wire transfer, what bus to take from Spokane to Missoula, and then to Cascade Falls. By the time I hung up, I had a plan, a real plan, not just survival, but an actual future taking shape. Mrs. Kim handed me a piece of paper with the bus schedule she'd printed out while I was on the phone. "You're really doing this," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I'm really doing this. If you're still with me at this point, I want to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because this journey is just getting started. And trust me, you'll want to know what happens when Claire finally reaches that ranch. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to make a leap of faith like this? Have you ever left everything familiar behind to chase something unknown? What would you do if you suddenly discovered you had family you never knew about? Share your story. I read every comment, and your experiences might inspire someone else who's standing at their own crossroads right now. The next morning, I boarded the Greyhound at 6:15 with a backpack containing everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, toiletries, Margaret's letter and photograph, my documents from St. Catherine's, and a prepaid phone Mrs. Kim had given me as a goodbye gift. The bus smelled like disinfectant, trying to cover up years of other smells, and the seats were covered in fabric that had seen better decades. I chose a window seat near the middle and pressed my forehead against the glass, watching Portland fade into suburbs, then farmland, then the long, empty stretches of eastern Washington. The landscape changed gradually, rain-soaked green giving way to brown hills and sagebrush, the sky opening up wider than I'd ever seen it. Other passengers came and went at various stops, Kennewick, Pasco, Spokane, but I stayed glued to my seat, afraid that if I moved too much, this fragile new reality might shatter. In Spokane, I had a 4-hour layover. I picked up the wire transfer Thomas had sent, $200 that felt like a fortune, and bought a sandwich and coffee at a diner near the station. The waitress was probably in her 50s, tired eyes but a kind smile, and she refilled my coffee 3 times without charging extra. "Where you headed?" she asked during one refill. "Montana," I said. "Cascade Falls. I inherited my grandmother's ranch." Saying it out loud still felt surreal, like I was trying on someone else's life to see if it fit. The waitress's eyebrows went up. "A ranch? Well, good for you, honey. That's real property, something solid. Don't let anyone take it from you." I promised I wouldn't, though I had no idea how to defend something I hadn't even seen yet. The bus from Spokane to Missoula took another 6 hours, climbing through mountains and winding along rivers that rushed cold and clear beside the highway. Idaho gave way to Montana, and something shifted in the air, a quality of light I'd never experienced in the city. Everything felt bigger here, more open, like the landscape had room to breathe and wanted you to breathe with it. I watched the sunset behind jagged peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that looked fake, they were so vivid. Other passengers slept or stared at their phones, but I couldn't look away. This was going to be my home now. These mountains, these skies, this wild, empty beauty that had nothing to do with concrete and traffic and crowds. I reached Missoula just after midnight, and had to wait until morning for the local bus that would take me the final leg to Cascade Falls. I spent the night in the bus station, dozing in an uncomfortable plastic chair with my backpack clutched to my chest, jerking awake every time someone walked past. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted and jittery from too much coffee and not enough sleep, but I was also closer than I'd ever been to something that belonged to me. The local bus was smaller, more like a van than a proper bus, and the driver was a chatty woman named Beth, who seemed to know everyone who got on. When I climbed aboard, she looked at me curiously. "You're new," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm headed to Cascade Falls," I told her. "First time." Beth's face lit up. "Cascade Falls, that's my hometown. What brings you out here?" I hesitated, then figured there was no point in hiding it. Small towns would find out anyway. I inherited my grandmother's ranch, Margaret Hendricks's place. Beth's expression shifted immediately to something between surprise and respect. "Margaret Hendricks was your grandmother? Well, I'll be. Margaret was good people, tough as nails but fair. She helped my husband and me out when we were struggling years back, never asked for anything in return. I'm real sorry for your loss, even though I know you didn't get to know her. The fact that a stranger mourned my grandmother more than I could, having never met her, hurt in a complicated way. But it also meant something. It meant Margaret had mattered. The drive from Missoula to Cascade Falls took almost 3 hours, winding through valleys and alongside rivers, passing through tiny towns that consisted of little more than a gas station and a post office. The land grew more rugged, more remote, until finally Beth pointed ahead. "There's Cascade Falls coming up." The town appeared gradually, first a few scattered houses, then Main Street with its brick buildings exactly like the photos I'd seen online. Beth pulled the van to a stop in front of what looked like a general store. "This is as far as I go," she said. "You need someone to pick you up?" I checked the address Thomas had given me. His office was on Main Street, just 2 blocks from where we'd stopped. "I can walk," I said. "Thank you for everything." Beth reached over and squeezed my hand. "You take care now, and welcome to Cascade Falls. People here look after their own, and Margaret was one of ours. That makes you one of ours too." I stepped off the bus into crisp mountain air that smelled like pine and wood smoke. It was late October, and Cascade Falls felt like autumn in a way Portland never did, leaves actually changing colors, a bite in the air that promised winter wasn't far behind. Main Street was quiet, a few trucks parked outside the diner, an old man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store. Everything moved slower here, more deliberately, like people had time to notice each other. I found Whitman and Associates easily, a small office tucked between a saddle shop and an insurance agency. The door chimed when I pushed it open. The receptionist looked up and smiled immediately. "You must be Claire. Mr. Whitman said you'd be arriving today. Go right on back, first door on the left." Thomas Whitman stood when I entered his office, coming around the desk to shake my hand. In person, he looked exactly like his photograph, weathered and kind, the sort of man who belonged in this landscape. "Claire, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Please, sit down. Can I get you coffee, water, anything?" I shook my head, too nervous to drink anything without spilling it. "I'm okay, thank you." He sat back down and pulled out a thick folder. "I know you've had a long journey, so I'll try to make this straightforward. Margaret was very specific about her wishes. The ranch is yours, free and clear. Here's the deed, already transferred into your name. Here are the keys to the house, the barn, and the equipment shed." He slid a set of keys across the desk, and I picked them up with shaking hands. They were real, solid, proof that this wasn't a dream. The property includes 270 acres, mostly grazing land, some forested areas up in the hills. The house is about 1,800 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, built in the 1960s, but maintained well until Margaret got too sick to keep up with repairs. The barn is solid, needs some work on the roof, but structurally sound. There's a well for water, septic system, and you're connected to the power grid. He pulled out a map and showed me the property boundaries, pointing out landmarks. The nearest neighbors are the Caldwell family, about 2 miles west. Good people. They checked on Margaret regularly toward the end. To the east you've got national forest land, so nobody'll be building there. I studied the map, trying to understand the scale of what I was looking at. 270 acres. I'd lived my entire life in rooms I could cross in 10 steps, and now I owned land that would take hours to walk across. "What's the catch?" I asked, because there had to be one. Nothing this good came without complications. Thomas leaned back in his chair. "The catch is that it's work, Claire, real work. The house needs updating, the fences need repairs, and if you want to actually ranch it, run cattle or horses, you're looking at significant investment and learning curve. Margaret set aside $4,000 to help you get started, but that'll go fast once you start making repairs. You'll need income, which in Cascade Falls usually means ranching, logging, or service work in town." He wasn't trying to discourage me, just being honest. I appreciated that. "I'm not afraid of work," I said. "I've been working since I was old enough to hold a broom." Thomas smiled. "Margaret said you'd be tough. She had faith in you even without meeting you. Now I should tell you something else. Margaret left you a letter, not the one you already got, a different one. She asked me to give it to you when you arrived, not before. She said you'd need to see the ranch first, understand what she was giving you, before reading what she wanted to say." He pulled out another envelope, this one sealed, my name written across the front in Margaret's careful handwriting. "I'll give you some privacy. Take your time. When you're ready, I'll drive you out to the ranch myself." He left the office, closing the door quietly behind him. I sat there holding the envelope, my grandmother's final words to me waiting inside. I broke the seal carefully and unfolded 2 pages of lined paper. "My dearest Claire," it began, and I could almost hear her voice, even though I'd never heard it before. "If you're reading this, then you've made it to Cascade Falls. You could have stayed in the city, taken the easier path, but you didn't. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. You're brave, Claire. Braver than I was at your age, braver than your mother was. You come from a line of women who've survived hard things, and that strength lives in you," the letter continued, each word feeling like a gift. "I've spent the last 13 years thinking about you every single day, wondering who you were becoming, what you liked, what you dreamed about. I wanted to write to you so many times, but the social worker said it might confuse you, might make things harder. So I did the only thing I could. I made sure you'd have a choice. This ranch was my life, Claire. Every inch of it holds memories, my childhood, my marriage, raising Lily, the good years and the hard ones. And now it's yours. You can sell it, walk away, take the money and build whatever life you want. Or you can stay. You can learn this land, work it, make it yours. Either way, I want you to know you deserved better than what life gave you. You deserved a family. You deserved to be wanted. And you were wanted by me every single day. Diku." The letter ended with directions, not to the ranch, but to something on it. "When you get to the property, go to the barn. In the northwest corner, behind the old feed bins, there's a loose floorboard. Under it, you'll find a metal box. Inside is something I've been saving for you since the day I found out you existed. It's not much, but it's yours. With all my love, your grandmother, Margaret." I folded the letter carefully and wiped my eyes. Thomas knocked softly and poked his head in. "Ready?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He grabbed his keys and we headed out to his truck, a dusty Ford that had clearly seen years of Montana weather. The drive out of town took us past the diner, the school, a small church with a white steeple, and then into open country where the road turned from pavement to gravel. Thomas drove in comfortable silence for a while before speaking. "Margaret talked about you toward the end. She'd had a stroke about a year before she died, and it slowed her down considerably. I'd visit sometimes, help with paperwork and such, and she'd always bring you up. She'd say things like, 'I wonder if Claire likes horses,' or 'I hope Claire knows she's smart enough to do anything she wants.' It ate at her that she couldn't be in your life." I stared out the window at the passing landscape, hills covered in golden grass, clusters of pine trees, the mountains rising in the distance like ancient guardians. "I wish I'd known about her," I said quietly. "I wish she'd known me." Thomas nodded. "Me too. But you're here now. That counts for something." We turned onto a narrow dirt road marked by a weathered wooden sign that read Hendricks Ranch in faded letters. The road wound through a meadow, dotted with wildflowers gone to seed, past a creek that gurgled over smooth stones, and finally opened up to reveal the ranch itself. My breath caught. The house sat on a slight rise, a simple structure with a pitched roof and a wraparound porch. The paint was peeling, white turned grey in places, and a few shutters hung crooked, but the bones were solid. Behind it stood the barn, a massive red building with a hayloft and doors tall enough to drive equipment through. To the left was a smaller shed, and to the right, corrals with wooden fencing in various states of repair. Beyond everything, the land stretched out in all directions, rolling hills and open sky as far as I could see. Thomas parked near the house and handed me the keys. "Take your time. I'll wait here. Let you have your first look alone." But I stepped out of the truck, and the silence hit me first. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of different sounds. Wind rustling through grass, birds calling from somewhere in the trees, the distant rush of the creek. No traffic, no sirens, no voices of too many people crammed into too little space. Just space itself, vast and open, and mine. I walked up the porch steps, the wood creaking under my feet, and unlocked the front door. It swung open with a groan of hinges that hadn't moved in months. The interior smelled like dust and old wood, and something floral I couldn't quite place. I stepped inside and let my eyes adjust to the dimness. The living room was to my left, furnished with a sagging couch, a rocking chair, and a stone fireplace blackened with soot from decades of fires. Bookshelves lined one wall, still full of books with cracked spines and faded covers. The kitchen was straight ahead, small but functional, with wooden cabinets and a porcelain sink stained rust brown around the drain. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but beneath it, I could see Margaret's life. A coffee mug on the counter, a dish towel hanging from the oven handle, a calendar on the wall stopped on March 8 months ago, when she must have been too sick to change it anymore. I walked through slowly, touching things carefully like they might disintegrate. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub and hexagonal floor tiles. The bedrooms were small but cozy, one clearly Margaret's with a quilt-covered bed and photographs on the dresser, the other nearly empty except for a twin bed and a simple nightstand. I picked up one of the photographs from Margaret's dresser. It showed a young woman in her 20s, dark hair and a bright smile, standing next to a horse. On the back, someone had written, "Lily, age 23, my mother." I studied her face, trying to memorize it, looking for traces of myself in her features. She looked happy in this picture, before everything fell apart, before addiction and pregnancy and death at 24. I set the photograph down gently and left the house. The barn was even bigger than it looked from the outside. I pushed open the heavy doors, and they rolled on tracks with a rusty shriek. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof, creating bars of light in the dusty air. The smell was overwhelming, old hay and leather and animal sweat embedded in the wood itself. Stalls lined both sides, empty now, but still holding the ghosts of horses or cattle that had once lived here. Tools hung on walls, shovels and pitchforks and things I didn't have names for, and in the northwest corner, just like Margaret had said, was a stack of old feed bins made of rotting wood. I moved them aside, my heart pounding. Behind them, the floorboards looked no different from the rest, but when I knelt down and pressed on them, one gave slightly. I pried it up with my fingers, splinters catching in my skin, and beneath it was a space about 2 feet deep. Inside sat a metal box, similar to an old ammunition case, olive green and heavy. I lifted it out carefully, brushing off cobwebs and dust, and carried it into a shaft of sunlight. The latch was stiff, but not locked. I opened it slowly. Inside were treasures that had nothing to do with money. First, a bundle of letters tied with string, postmarked from various cities, Seattle, Portland, Boise, all addressed to Margaret, but returned unopened. These must have been the letters she'd tried to send Lily, the daughter who'd run away and cut off contact. Beneath those was a small jewelry box containing a simple gold ring and a locket on a tarnished chain. I opened the locket and found 2 tiny photographs, one of Margaret as a young woman, the other of Lily as a child. Generations of women I came from, both gone now, but here in my hands. There was also a leather journal, its pages yellowed and filled with Margaret's handwriting. I flipped through it carefully. It was a ranch journal, documenting daily life over decades. Weather patterns, cattle births, repairs needed, first frost dates, last frost dates, the rhythms of this land recorded year after year, but scattered throughout, were personal entries. Lily turned 16 today. She won't speak to me. I don't know how to reach her. And later, found out Lily is pregnant. She's leaving. I said terrible things. God forgive me. And years later, social worker came today. I have a granddaughter, Claire. She's 6 years old. They won't let me have her. My heart is broken. Tears blurred my vision as I read her pain, her regret, her love for people she'd lost or never known. At the bottom of the box was an envelope containing photographs of me, the same ones from the shed in the original story, but different here. School pictures from ages 7 through 18, sent annually by some social worker who'd understood that a grandmother deserved to see her granddaughter grow up, even if they couldn't be together. Margaret had kept them all, documented my life from a distance, created a connection across the silence and separation. And finally, there was a bank book, old-fashioned and worn. I opened it and saw deposits made regularly over 13 years. Margaret putting away $50 here, $100 there, building the $4,000 cushion she'd left me. Blood money, guilt money, love money. It was all of those things and none of them. It was just proof that I'd mattered to someone. I sat on the barn floor holding that box and cried harder than I'd ever cried in my life. Not sad tears exactly, but something bigger and more complicated. Relief and grief and anger and gratitude all mixed together until I couldn't tell one from the other. I cried for Margaret, who'd loved from a distance and died hoping I'd understand. I cried for Lily, who'd fought demons I'd never have to face because she'd made sure I went somewhere safe. And I cried for myself, for the 19 years I'd spent thinking I came from nothing when I'd actually come from women who'd loved fiercely even when love wasn't enough to fix everything. When I finally stood up and left the barn, Thomas was still waiting by his truck, patient as stone. He took one look at my face and nodded like he understood everything without needing explanation. "You found what she left you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." My voice was rough from crying. "She left me everything," he smiled gently. "That's what grandmothers do. Now let me show you how to work the well pump and where the electrical panel is. You'll need to know these things if you're planning to stay." I looked back at the house, the barn, the land rolling away in every direction. "I'm staying," I said, and for the first time in my life, I meant it when I said the word home. Thomas spent the next 2 hours teaching me the basics of keeping the ranch functional. He showed me how to prime the well pump when it got stubborn, where to flip breakers if the power went out, how to check the propane tank that fed the stove and water heater. He pointed out which fences needed immediate repair and which could wait until spring. He explained that the Caldwells, my nearest neighbors, raised cattle and would probably be willing to help if I needed anything. That small ranching communities operated on a code of mutual assistance that went back generations. "People out here don't wait to be asked," he said. "If they see you need help, they'll show up, but you have to be willing to accept it, and you have to be willing to help back when they need it. That's how it works." Before he left, Thomas handed me his business card with his personal cell phone written on the back. "I know this is overwhelming, Claire. If you need anything, legal questions, advice, or just someone to talk to, you call me. Margaret trusted me to look after her interests, and that includes looking after you now." I thanked him, my throat tight with gratitude I didn't have words for. He drove away in a cloud of dust, and then I was alone. Completely, totally alone for the first time in my life. Not in a crowded building with too many people, but truly alone, in the middle of 270 acres of Montana wilderness. The silence should have been frightening, but instead it felt like relief, like I could finally breathe without someone else's air pressing in on me. I spent the rest of that first day exploring. I walked the property boundaries as far as I could before the light began to fade, following fence lines and discovering corners of the land Margaret had known by heart. I found the creek Thomas had mentioned, cold and clear, running over smooth stones worn by decades of water. I found an old apple orchard, the trees gnarled and unpruned, but still bearing small misshapen fruit. I found the remnants of what must have been a vegetable garden, now overgrown with weeds, but marked by neat rows that spoke of someone who'd cared about order and purpose. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of Margaret's life, the work she'd done, the things she'd built, the careful tending of land that had defined her existence. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, I returned to the house. The electricity worked, and I flipped on lights in rooms that had been dark for months. I found sheets in a hall closet and made up the bed in the smaller bedroom, the one that wasn't Margaret's, because sleeping in her room felt too much like trespassing on a life I'd never shared. I took a shower in the clawfoot tub, the water pressure weak but hot, and washed away 2 days of travel grime. Then I wrapped myself in one of Margaret's quilts, sat on the porch in the rocking chair, and watched the stars emerge. I'd never seen stars like this. In Portland, light pollution turned the night sky into a muddy grey void, punctuated by a few dim points. But here, away from everything, the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Constellations I'd only read about in books were suddenly visible. Orion with his belt, the Big Dipper pointing north, Cassiopeia's W shape. I sat there for hours, wrapped in that quilt, listening to the night sounds of a ranch, coyotes yipping in the distance, an owl calling from somewhere in the trees, the wind moving through the grass like breathing. And for the first time in 19 years, I felt like I'd found where I was supposed to be. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of birds I couldn't name. I made coffee in Margaret's kitchen using an old percolator I found in the cupboard, and I sat at her table, reading through the ranch journal I'd found in the metal box. Her entries spanned 4 decades, beginning when she was a young wife, learning to ranch alongside her husband, documenting their struggles and victories, the births of calves, the years of drought, the good harvests, and the bad. Her husband James appeared throughout the earlier entries, his death from a heart attack marked by a single devastating line when Margaret was 53. James died today. I don't know how to do this without him. But she had done it for 28 more years, running the ranch alone, raising cattle, mending fences, surviving Montana winters that could kill the unprepared. And woven through all of it were mentions of Lily, the daughter who'd brought both joy and heartbreak. Margaret had documented Lily's childhood with obvious love, her first words, her first ride on a horse, her laughter and her temper. But as Lily entered her teenage years, the entries grew darker. Fights about boys, about responsibility, about futures being thrown away. And then Lily was gone, and the entries became an ache that never healed. Still no word from Lily. 10 months now. I pray she's safe. I pray she knows I'm sorry. Reading Margaret's life story in her own words felt like being given a map to my own history. I came from people who didn't give up, who worked until their hands bled, who loved even when love hurt. That was in my blood, that stubbornness and strength. I could feel it stirring in me now. Not just the determination to survive, but the determination to build something, to take this ranch that Margaret had poured her life into and make it live again. I spent the next week learning the property inside and out. I catalogued what needed fixing, which was nearly everything, and started making lists. The roof had missing shingles, the porch steps were rotting, several fence sections had collapsed completely. The barn needed new doors on 2 of the stalls. The list was overwhelming, but I broke it down into small pieces, things I could tackle one at a time. I drove into Cascade Falls in Margaret's old truck, which Thomas had left keys for, and bought supplies at the hardware store. The owner, a man named Frank, who looked to be in his 70s, recognized Margaret's truck immediately. "That's Margaret Hendricks's Ford," he said. "You must be the granddaughter." Word had already spread, apparently. I nodded, and Frank smiled. "Margaret was good people. You need any help with that ranch, you let me know. We take care of our own around here." That phrase again, our own. I was starting to understand what it meant, that by being Margaret's granddaughter, I'd been adopted into a community that had already decided I belonged. Over the following weeks, people started showing up. The Caldwells, my nearest neighbors, arrived one Saturday morning with their teenage sons and spent the entire day helping me mend fences. They wouldn't accept payment, just asked that I help them with their fall branding when the time came. A woman named Janet from the church brought me a casserole and an invitation to Sunday services. Beth, the bus driver who'd brought me to town, stopped by with her husband to help me patch the barn roof. Nobody made a big deal about it. They just showed up, did the work, and left with promises to come back if I needed anything else. This was how communities worked out here, through actions rather than words, through showing up rather than just talking about helping. I also started learning about ranching, real ranching, not just maintenance, but the actual work of raising animals and working land. The Caldwells loaned me books and gave me advice. Frank at the hardware store walked me through what I'd need if I wanted to start small, maybe a few head of cattle or some chickens to begin with. Thomas connected me with the local agricultural extension office, where a specialist named Maria spent hours teaching me about soil quality, water rights, and the economics of small-scale ranching. It was overwhelming and exhausting and absolutely thrilling. For the first time in my life, I was building something that was mine. Not borrowed or temporary, but actually mine. On Thanksgiving, 4 months after I'd arrived, the Caldwells invited me to dinner. Their house was warm and loud with the chaos of 3 generations gathered around one table. Grandparents and parents and kids, all talking over each other, passing food, telling stories, arguing good-naturedly about whether the Broncos would make the playoffs. They'd set a place for me like I'd always been part of it, and Mrs. Caldwell introduced me to relatives as Claire, Margaret's granddaughter, who's fixing up the ranch. Not the orphan girl, not the foster kid, just Claire, Margaret's granddaughter, someone who belonged. After dinner, I walked back to my ranch under a sky full of stars, my stomach full and my heart fuller. The house was dark as I approached, but I'd left the porch light on and it glowed like a beacon in the darkness. I sat on the porch steps, wrapped in Margaret's quilt that I'd carried with me, and thought about how far I'd traveled in 4 months. Not just the 700 miles from Portland to Cascade Falls, but the distance from being nobody to being somebody, from having nothing to having everything that mattered. The ranch still needed work. I still had to figure out how to make it profitable, how to turn it from a burden into a business. But I had time. I had land. I had a community that had decided to claim me. And I had Margaret's legacy, not just the property, but the lesson she'd taught me, that love doesn't always look the way you expect it to, that sometimes the people who care about you most are the ones you never get to meet, and that family isn't just blood, but also the connections we choose to honor. I pulled out Margaret's photograph from my pocket, the one that had been in the first letter, and looked at her weathered face in the porch light. "Thank you," I whispered to her, to the night, to whatever force had brought me here. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for leaving me away home." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the smell of pine and earth and the promise of winter coming. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and another answered. The ranch settled around me, the house creaking, the barn doors rattling slightly, everything alive in its own way. And I sat there on those porch steps, wrapped in my grandmother's quilt on my grandmother's land, and finally understood what it meant to be home. Thank you so much for staying with Claire through this entire journey. If her story touched something in you, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel. These stories of resilience, of finding yourself, of discovering that you come from somewhere even when you thought you came from nowhere, they matter. And sharing them helps create a community where people realize they're not alone in their struggles or their searches. I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Have you ever discovered something about your past that changed everything for you? Have you found your own version of that ranch, that place or person or truth that made you feel like you finally belonged? Share it with us. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today, that voice telling them to keep going, to take that leap, to follow that mysterious letter or key or whisper of possibility that's calling to them. And tell me, what's the biggest lesson you're taking away from Claire's journey? For me, it's that the people who love us find ways to reach us even across impossible distances, even across time itself, and that sometimes the greatest gift isn't being there, but making sure we have something to hold on to when we're ready. Until next time, take care of yourselves, believe in your own strength, and remember that you come from somewhere, even if you haven't found it yet. It's waiting for you.